everybody, and welcome to Positive Fandom. Welcome to the Burr Network. I am your host, RM, and tonight we have with us Darth Plato. Darth Plato, how are you tonight?
I'm good. I've been waiting. I've been waiting for a few days for this review. Thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, it's such a special night, Darth Plato. We have been waiting a long time for this Napoleon film, and there's been a lot of talk. There's been a lot of expectation. There's been a lot of speculation, and certainly a lot of wishing and ideas of what I think we both would like to see in a film like this. And I think that we both agree that we, after kind of like going to see this, are expecting an epic film of monumental proportions. It's a 2 hour, 38-minute film approximately. And certainly, I think that the casting, everything from the casting to the approach to this film, is something that you and I have been talking about for months and months and months, Darth Plato. You and I reviewed a number of different versions of Napoleon and Josephine's life, uh, just looking at the different depictions of how Napoleon has been shown in the moving image. And certainly, we've had some incredible times watching different depictions of this incredible person, somebody who changed history, someone whose impression is larger than life. And of course, we're talking about Napoleon, the Joaquin Phoenix, who stars as Napoleon in this film. And Darth Plato, you've had a chance to see it. I just saw it today. We have so much to say about this film, everybody. I also want to say hello to everybody out there who is there. We got Mikey Lito and we have Mr. Londell's Groovy Movies. Hello to both of you out there. Hope you are doing well, and thank you for joining us this evening. So, Darth Plato, it is really interesting because we knew that this was going to be a movie of epic proportions. We knew this was going to be covering Napoleon. And we also, you and I have spoken, there's a lot of information, a lot of things that we know about Napoleon. And obviously, somebody taking on this endeavor, deciding to go ahead and depict such a famous and well-known character in history, it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be difficult. It's not going to be the easiest thing to do on film. I think that, to be honest with you, I think the casting choices were good in this film, Darth Plato. I think there was a lot of talk about Joaquin Phoenix, and of course, we know he's a fantastic performer. We've seen him in so many movies. My favorite is the Joker one. Darth Plato, what did you think, just from the bat, before we get too deep into this, about the casting choices now that you've seen the film Napoleon?
I like Joaquin Phoenix as an actor. He's a phenomenal actor, but the fact is he's too old for this role. He's over 51 years old. He's older than Napoleon was when Napoleon died. He died in May 5th, I think, in 1821. And he's playing Napoleon at the age of when he was only 24. The movie starts in 1793. He's 24 years old in 1793. Did that look like the picture? Did that look like a 24-year-old guy? It does not. So I love the actor. I just think not for this movie. And also his depiction of Napoleon. I'll unload more about this later, but he basically approaches it like almost like Commodus. He's maybe not quite so extravagant about it, but it reminds me more of Commodus than Napoleon.
That's very interesting. And certainly something to think about. I think that there is something to be said about, in this particular case, because he does depict someone who is much younger than himself. I wondered, you and I had talked about this, Darth Plato, would they have gone in and made him look younger? Would that have changed our impression in the film? And I'm not quite sure how that would have been accomplished after seeing the film now. I don't think that that would have even been an option, even despite the fact that I do love Joaquin Phoenix. I think he's a phenomenal performer. I think he did a great performance here for what he was asked to do
Mm-hmm.
in this role. I think he just did such a brilliant job with it. However, I'm not quite sure, and it may be impossible to nail Napoleon, so to speak, to get that right. But to be honest with you, you and I have talked about the character and what we imagine this character to be like, what the real person was like. We can only imagine. but I would have liked to have seen something a little bit more charismatic. This is, my personal desire in the role. I wanted to be seduced by this character and kind of, swept off my feet by his ability to encourage others to follow him, and of course to get Josephine to fall in love with him. So, do you think that you got that after seeing Joaquin Phoenix's performance, Dark Widow? And were you expecting that in this role?
I wasn't I wasn't sure what I was expecting, honestly. When Phoenix first came on the screen, he seemed very stiff. Like when he meets Josephine and they're sitting there, he acts like he acts like he's the king of France. He's just completely rigid and like trying to behave like in an expected way. He wouldn't have acted like that. If he would have came in, just flat right down, and he would have started playing 20 questions, because that was his conversational style. He was very he was very rapid fire, question after question after question. That was the kind of guy he was. And it's that Phoenix didn't do. He just sitting there like he was waiting for the paint to dry.
Okay, I mean, I think that is very interesting that you described him in that manner. And of course, I don't associate that description personally with what I imagine Napoleon to be like. Of course, I don't know what he was like, but if I had to imagine Napoleon the man, I wouldn't associate him with being stiff and in that way that you described Darth Vader, which I think was a
Mm.
very good description of how we saw this character early on, especially. Certainly, I also was not expecting there to be in some sense of the this sort of, it feels like a lot of his charisma was shut off in this
Mm.
role.
Yeah.
And we know that Joaquin Phoenix is very charismatic. He certainly
Yes.
is able to put that charm on and completely seduce you into whatever you need to have done. In fact, there's a scene in the movie where the character has to approach his own army that he's led for probably 10, 15 years, and they're told to kind of like put a gun on him, and he's like, come on guys, you want to come with me, right? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, well, I don't know whether I felt as if they were thoroughly convinced, from this performance, that he is the man that they want to back. I think it's maybe even very difficult to show that, maybe even
Yeah.
impossible to show that level of charisma. The other day, I was talking to someone about how they depict Princess Diana, and to describe the phenomenon, the way that she was so popular in the world, and how it's very difficult to capture that in the moving image. But even elementally, Darth Plato, I do have to wonder, and of course, you are going to answer this question for me because you and I have talked about just a little bit about what you think the particular director was trying to convey here. And there is a lot to say about this, but honestly, I think for what Joaquin Phoenix was asked to do, it's clear that he was asked to portray this character in this manner, and that's what he did. Um, what about just I think it's Jessica Kirby, or is it? Am I saying her?
Yes. Vanessa Kirby.
Yes, Vanessa Kirby, excuse me, and she played Josephine. What did you think of her performance, Darth Plato?
First of all, she's a phenomenal actress and she fits the role. I think she does fit the role. She might be a tad young. I'm not sure how old she is, but my complaint, because I want to be faithful to history, that's just where I come from, is the age difference between these two actors is 14 years. He's older than the actress by 14 years. Phoenix is older than Kirby. In real life, Napoleon was actually 6 years younger than Josephine. So they're swinging it the complete opposite direction. So clearly, when they're making this movie, they're not trying to make historical accuracy. They're going for something else. I'll elaborate that as we go along. But the character of Josephine, um, I'm mirroring pretty much what you said. She was fine for what she was being asked to do, and I'm fine with that. I'm not criticizing the actors. I'm not criticizing Phoenix or Kirby at all. And the costuming was phenomenal. I'll get that out of the way in case I forgot to say it, because I have to say it. I love the costumes in this movie.
I did too. I thought it was incredible what they did, and this clearly was an incredible amount of work, not just in the let's say the costumes for civilians, but for the military costumes. Darth Plato, it was absolute perfection. I was so impressed with what they did with those costumes, and of course, the setting is where they filmed it also looked beautiful. But certainly, I have to say that I was very impressed by what they were able to accomplish. And I have to congratulate the production team and crew for doing such a beautiful job with the costuming. Certainly, here's a beautiful a picture of Kirby there as Josephine, and she looks stunning. She looks absolutely beautiful, very, very tempting. But for me, Darth Plato, I'm going to be honest that I didn't feel the chemistry between Kirby and Phoenix the way I felt between Armand Asante in that version.
Yes.
Um, that was
Yeah, yeah. Just Amand and Jacqueline Bassett. Yeah.
that version was smoking hot. I mean, I swore that they were doing something after the show. Like it was so hot. Why did we not see that intensity? Because I'm not even sure. But from the love letters, Darth Vader, from the letters, they had an intense love connection. Do you think we needed to see something more intense on the screen in this film?
You would think so. Yeah, you would think so. But what they did give us was oh man, it was a little hard to watch, honestly. I'm not, yeah, like I said, I'm not really sure what the director was going for, and in terms of their personal interaction, I think they were just trying to show that Josephine was an object in his life that triggered something in him psychologically, and that's what he was rolling on. Let me say this first. Um, there's a lot of figures in history that are controversial, and I think Napoleon Bonaparte is probably the most controversial figure in the history of the world for a non-religious figure. Not counting religious figures, he is the most controversial man in history. And I know from experience when dealing with Napoleon scholarship that people are pretty much one side or the other. They're going to bend over backward to defend everything he did, or he was the Corsican ogre. He was the psychosexual maniac that had to be destroyed. So there's no middle ground here. You're either pro Napoleon or you're anti Napoleon, and the scholarship is very hard to deal with it. In recent years, scholarship has really started to drift towards, in some respects, this weird angle, this psychosexual motivations for Napoleon's his entire career, and that's what we're seeing in this movie. I think that's where Ridley Scott is going. I don't know why he's doing that. I guess he thought, oh, it'll be a good movie. People are going to go watch the movie. They're not going to know anything about Napoleon. They're going to see my movie, and that's fine with me because I'm laughing all the way to the bank. I think that's what he thought.
Well, I want to say something that I was not expecting were scenes in the film where the audience actually laughed. Like there were parts that, like almost as if it was comic relief. And like there was a scene where Joaquin Phoenix has to say to the British, "These guys think they're so special just because they have ships." And I swear, everybody in the theater that I was in started to laugh like it was a punchline. And I don't know whether it was meant to be funny or not,
There
but it
was.
came off as being funny, and it felt wrong. It didn't
That's,
feel right to me. I felt that this was a very serious situation, and I'm not blaming everybody for laughing, but what I mean is it felt like it was not the best place to put a comedic moment. But
it is if you're trying to diminish the character.
mhm. um and that's a very good observation. The next thing that I noticed that I personally was not too fond of was, and there's no other way to describe it, I had to watch jackhammer sex. I had to watch Napoleon jackhammer sex Josephine. And I'm like, even the most intimate moments between two people does not necessarily have to be done in that manner.
Right.
And I was not that. I understand that this is from an artistic level, and I understand that, but I felt like there should have been a different version of that, and I wanted a different version. So on top of not feeling the heavy, intense chemistry that I would have liked to have seen them, have, I couldn't believe that I was seeing that. So I felt like that was not the best choice. But I mean, what did you think of it, Darth Plato? Some of the more intimate moments between Josephine and Napoleon.
Well, I kind of commented on it a little bit already. Is I thought it was very uncomfortable, and I wish they had done it differently. We didn't need to see it done like that, but I kind of had a suspicion that they were going to kind of go this direction. Not necessarily with the scenery, I mean, but with trying to show him in a diminished capacity. I kind of was suspecting that. Um, if you're going to show a movie about Napoleon, you really have to take a period of his life and focus it narrowly on that time. Like, say, the Waterloo movie. The entire movie is about the Battle of Waterloo. And they did the entire movie just on that. It's a very narrow, focused window of time. The period is a period of about 2-3 days. That's it. That's all it is. This movie is trying to depict quite literally 32 years of the man's life. You can't even do that in a 4 hour movie, let alone a 2.5 hour movie. So as soon as I realized that they were going to bullet all this different stuff all through the timeline, I knew that something was going to be missing. They're either going to show the highlight reel of his successes and his grandeur, or they're going to go the psychosexual route and talk about look at this weirdo, look at the psychopath that held Josephine hostage and hold France hostage and all of Europe hostage. I was afraid that was the direction they were going to go, and that is the direction they went.
Well, I think it's a very different tone than what I'm accustomed to seeing these characters portrayed as. For example, in this picture here that I have shown on the screen, obviously this is the moment when he and Josephine were crowned emperor and empress.
Yes, and look at
Uh,
those costumes.
the costumes are stunning. Darth Plato, I didn't want this scene to end. I wanted to see them, do the procession, be in there, get everybody's thing. It felt too short to me for such a momentous. This was a big deal, a very important time in their lives. Maybe the height of the entire thing for both of them is this moment that this is happening, and I mean, it certainly does look like the famous painting that we've seen, and they even had an illustrator while it was going on. Darth Plato there, kind of quickly drawing in. I've got, like it had that feed that felt like the most exciting moment to me because we knew that we were seeing something that was very unique, very special, an incredible accomplishment by Napoleon, and of course Josephine by his side. Do you think they rushed this one? And do you think it was rushed? I mean, what do you think? Do you think that do you think the new version, the Apple version, Darth Plato, will have a longer version of this coronation scene?
It might. They seemed to do everything they needed to do there. It wasn't. The wait for it was longer than the actual ceremony. Um, he 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 crowned himself emperor. That's true. He regretted it afterwards because he thought that it suggested a certain volatile egoism, and you don't really get that sense from the movie. But he did acknowledge after the fact that he probably shouldn't have done that. And he crowned. He had no intention of crowning anyone but Josephine. He had a fight with his own mother's own family about Josephine. They didn't share that in the movie at all. That's a really fascinating angle in his life, and they could have focused on that. They could have made the entire movie just about the coronation and the conflict with his family and people saying, "You can't marry her. Are you crazy?" That could have been a movie right there.
Yeah, and I think that you were talking about the focus that you could figure out right away. And of course, you and I have watched documentaries on Napoleon, many different versions of different parts of his life with Josephine. And certainly the notion of this being the shorter version, I agree with you 100%. But even with, let's say, this approach to deciding that you're going to portray the character this way, I also didn't feel the tone was right for that portrayal as well, Darth Plato. And I think what's really interesting about it is that if that was the case, if that's the tone that was going to be taken,
Now the
then
tone was all wrong. I'm sorry, the tone was all wrong. And also, he didn't snatch the crown away from the Pope. That whole thing was choreographed. He didn't. There was nothing on it. There was no surprises. He wasn't. Pope wasn't caught off guard by that. And the only reason why the Pope was even there is because they were trying to recreate the coronation of Charlemagne. So it was very choreographed, and that was the only reason why it all played out the way that it did. Uh, I wanted to make some positive comments before we
well, I
continue. Okay, go ahead.
we are going to make positive comments, and I think we are making positive comments. I'm simply looking at it and trying to see, because if a person is going into the theater just now to look at this film, I think they might come out a bit confused by it
It is.
because
I'm not telling people not to go see the movie. I'm not telling people not to go see the movie. They should see the movie to judge it for themselves.
I would say yes, and I haven't even gotten to the points of where I absolutely loved what they did, especially with some of the military formations, some of the battle scenes, which I felt like there could have been more battle scenes because he had done so many battles, Darth Leto. In fact, they could have just focused on the battles, and
Mhm.
like you said, Darth Leto, they could have just picked one thing or another, and certainly made a point in that regard. Uh, so that certainly is true. But this does seem like more of a character analysis to me of this individual, and I don't think there's a right or a wrong in a sense because we don't know this individual. We were not alive during his lifetime, and we can't necessarily grasp a sense of the impact, unlike people during our century and our lifetime. So this was so many hundreds of years ago. It may not be possible to necessarily capture everything, but for the tone felt like it there wasn't that confidence in what they were trying to portray. So I think when some people may go into the theater to watch this, they will be kind of making bullet points of like, oh yes, that's right, I heard that Napoleon, there was a coup and that's how he made them vote or whatever. I did like that scene where he's running out to get his guys and saying, "Hey, we got to go." And he's like, "Okay, let's have a vote." And
Yeah, that was one of the worst scenes, by the way, but okay.
well, what I liked about it is that they wanted to push the point of a vote under duress. And there's been a lot of discussions about coups and what exactly happens during a coup. And I think that this one was a very well done one because if you can point guns into somebody's face and saying you got to do a vote, there can't be any, kind of like speculation as to what's going on. These persons' hands are tied, and there is no debate about that. So I think that they wanted to force the issue of showing that in maybe more of a literal interpretation of how things went down. I don't know the details of how the coup went down, but I always imagine when something like this happens and you're bringing in military people and you're forcing people to do things, it's uncomfortable, and it's got to be an uncomfortable scene. Uh, People running back and forth, and you don't know who's on your side.
Yeah.
But what I found very interesting about it, Darth Vader, and I'm going to mention this again because I wanted to be convinced that these soldiers had his back no matter what. It's like if he asked them to charge into wherever, they're just going to go, and they're so loyal to him that we could feel that. And I even in that scene where it felt like they were behind him. That might have been the one scene where I felt as if they were willing to go ahead and even if they had to force everybody's hand, those soldiers were behind him. But I just feel like holding on to the notion of the soldiers being so committed to him was such an important thing for this film, even if regardless of the opinion of the character, regardless of the opinion of Napoleon, that's one fact that cannot be disputed, right, Darth Plato?
Well, yeah, by the time 1799 rolled around, which is when the Brumaire coup took place, he was already a giant in profession. And he was surrounded by people around him who were also giants in their profession. Charles Leclerc was there, Marat was there. Marat was the most respected cavalry officer in the army by bar none. So as soon as he walked into the room, people were going to, oh, that's Marat. I know who that is. So these were giants in their professions. So when when they're put in that situation and they're asked to be fought, are you going to follow this man, or are you going to go? Are you going to go listen to those baying lambs in the that council chamber? It's not hard to see where they went. Although
Yeah,
there was a very real danger to Napoleon in real life in that scene.
and that's something that I wanted to um, kind of really see if the film could impress that on the viewer, especially since it's nothing. It's an extraordinary circumstance because of what he was able to pull his men through. Maybe one of the greatest military leaders of all time, undisputably, but to be able to show it effectively on the screen that they do have that. And some of the scenes where I was expecting to see them really just, I wasn't convinced all the time. So I think that kind of tone, it's like a little inconsistency in regards to where I should be feeling as the viewer. That's what I'm really trying to say. So I was curious as to whether you had that too. And some of you in the chat as well. Please share with us. I see you saying uh,
Yeah, Bleach and Chance.
with comments, everybody. And I am seeing that Mr. Londell's Weary Movies talks about the historical aspect, and Darth Plato is going to talk about that in a second. And the writer says everyone should see the film, as it
Yeah.
concurs with this. Tom Jr. Jackson is there. Hi, Tom. Hope you are well. Certainly, we all want to see that. And the writer says aren't in that scene when they started loving Napoleon again was completely missed opportunity, no real build up to that whatsoever. Yeah, and that really concerns me, Darth Plato, because even let's say, as I said, even if this is a character analysis and you want to depict Napoleon in a certain way, I think that the biggest fault in the film might be that for even a second that people wavered trying to be behind him, because I don't get that impression at all. I think these guys, as you said, Darth Plato, were incredibly committed to him in a way maybe that we've never seen before in a military situation. So I think that that could have been a very interesting thing, that even if he's doing this other depiction, we constantly see that. And it feels like, gee, even despite all these things that he's going through, these guys have his back and it's incredible. And that could be something that could have been such a huge focus for the film, at least for me, after watching it, Darth Plato. And there's so much to talk about. There's so much I want to ask you, Darth Plato, about this. Here we have they had some beautiful shots, Darth Plato, of
Yeah.
Joaquin Phoenix on the horse and stuff. What did you think about his depiction, the physical depictions of him on the horse and even in the battlefield in the film?
Well, visually, it looks really good. Napoleon was often mounted a lot. There's a lot of painting where he is mounted. I have one right here. This is my mouse pad. This is him. This is a stylized picture of him on the Alps. So I'm sorry, not the best lighting. I apologize. This is
Um,
Jacques Louis David paintings. Just look up Jacques Louis David. You can see a lot of cool paintings of Napoleon. He was a very good horseman. He did not fight. He did not fight personally at Waterloo. I don't think he fought personally since the Battle of Arcola in 1796. So I don't think that he did a lot of his personal fighting. He did a lot of running around. He was very physically active in going around and doing check micromanaging some people. Some people he didn't micromanage because he thought they were good commanders. But visually in the movie, I thought they did a good job. Look at that scene right there. That looks really good.
Yeah, there are some shots in there, Darth Plato, that really took my breath away. I think that, from a cinematography point of view, Darth Plato, and we did kind of touch on how the film looks, but even from a cinematography point of view, I was blown away by how beautiful it really does look and how much care and attention they took to focusing and making Joaquin Phoenix be such a major focus of the film. Of course, he is the star, but sometimes we have characters when their name is on the title, but we don't always see them. In this one, I feel like we did, and even with Josephine, a lot of times we did get a lot of screen time with her as well. Um, Now, the other thing that I wanted to ask you about has to do with some of the shots where we got to see military action, Darth Plato, and I just was looking for one. I don't think they have it up there, but it was an incredible shot where you got to see. Of course, it was the Waterloo scene, and you saw the British I guess, army do these incredible formations. I was so
You talk about the
impressed.
square formation.
Yeah, that's probably what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know what the name of the formation is, so I'm sorry I don't know the name. However, I did want to mention that I thought it was a beautiful scene.
Yeah.
It really was. Of course, I'm not going to be able to find one, but I thought that that was so impressive, so incredible what they were able to do in regards to, like, especially for someone like me, because I'm not going to open up a book necessarily and look up, all the battles that Napoleon has done. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to look at a film like this and get an impression of what it might have looked like. And I think those battlefield scenes were extraordinary. What did you think?
Um, Visually, they look very impressive. Because I know that those scenes were not very good representations of what really happened in terms of the unfolding of the action. Waterloo was one of those things. Just looking at the screen, I could tell that they didn't really capture Waterloo very well. What was very distinctive about Waterloo was the farmhouses that had been converted into strongholds along the front diagonally. That the armies were diagonal to each other, and there wasn't a lot of room for a wide open shot like that. So the shot shouldn't have looked like that. Now there did come a point where there was a cavalry charge. It didn't happen quite like that, and I don't think the horses got as close to the square as they showed on the screen. I'm not sure, they were way too close. there's not much I can say about that. Austerlitz was more egregious. Uh, when the French arrived at Austerlitz, they took a defensive position because they didn't really know the ground, and they saw that they were dealing with more troops than they were dealing with because the main body of the Russian army had just arrived. So they, and that was one of the rare instances where Napoleon took the defensive and yielding the initiative. So the Austrians and the Russians, they did initiate the action. That is true. But the scene about the breaking of the ice, that whole thing is fantasy. It did not go down like that at all.
Okay, and that, I'm glad you mentioned that. And of course, it's some very important information here. We see some scenes, and I know um, the writers talked about the snow scenes here. There was one here I just happened to click on, and certainly I enjoyed seeing it. So even though it's not historic, perhaps it's not historically significant or even accurate, there were some parts of this Darth Plato that I enjoyed tremendously. Of course, this is not. This might be actually not a battle scene there, but I just there was one more that I want to. I'm kind of flipping through them very quickly, but there was one more scene that I really enjoyed, and I don't think it's on here, but oh yeah, here it is. It was very interesting seeing, of course, Napoleon in Egypt, and of course, these are things that we're expecting because of the character and what we know. But I think it is. Yeah, this was what I was referring to, Darth Plato, and I think we did mention that the writers talks about the soldiers were told to form squares to the opposing army. I thought it came out beautiful from my point of view, even if it isn't historically accurate, Darth Plato, and even if the shots are not where it should be. Um, but yeah, it is very interesting that they chose to present it this way, Darth Plato. Let's say in context and not necessarily historically accurate. And I did want to ask, and I did ask you this before, Darth Plato, about whether this was actually a dramatization of Napoleon's life or is it a biopic?
Neither. It's it's like all the British propagandists of 200 years ago came back from the dead, and they decided to do a movie. And this is what we're getting.
Well, Mike Alito says Darius Wolski was the cinematographer and is to be commended. Absolutely. I agree on that 100%. And Bonzo Kilborn says, what is history without a little license? Something to think about, certainly when you're trying to get your point across in this particular depiction. Now, Darth Plato, I also want to mention that you were right about how this film seemed to span an incredible amount of time.
Yeah,
And
30,
certainly,
32 years.
yeah, it was a long time. And I think what was also very interesting was that we kind of, and this was another scene that one of the other people who was in the chat mentioned. There was this empty city where we get to see it's kind of, they kind of wanted to take you on a few highlights of what was going on, but I'm not quite sure whether in context it
22 years.
created a
Well,
realism.
yeah, it was 22 years. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I'm not quite sure whether it created the realism that they were going for in the film. Now, it is true, the writers, when Napoleon enters the city, and, of course, this is not the scene, this is the scene of where it's being burnt. But at this point in the film, it is very interesting to see them walking through the city and there's nobody there. The first thing I always think, Derek Plato, when I see a scene like that is that it's a setup, right? It's an ambush or, it's a trap or something. But it certainly wasn't. It really was kind of like a message that was being told to him.
Mhm.
We do get a very good point in the film where someone mentions that Napoleon can't resist a head-on strike or something like that. What do you think about that comment? And do you think that that point was trying to be gotten across in the film? Was it shown as something that you believed?
It's a comment that someone would make if they don't know anything about Napoleon and don't give a crap about Napoleon.
So no,
No,
you don't think, okay. Well, it is very interesting too. I think at some point we do see some scenes that I'm not going to say it's disturbing, but it's sad where some of the soldiers are eating the horses, and they tried to
that did happen. Yes.
they tried to create a scenario where this connection between Napoleon and Josephine, in the beginning where she talks about how he's supposed to be nothing without her. and she has to proclaim that after he's kind of like caught her with this other gentleman. And then even at the end, the notion of he's not able to almost do fight properly, because she's not around anymore. What do you think about that influence?
You mean because they divorced?
Because they divorced, and
Yeah,
yes.
that's a common complaint that historians do make. The height of Napoleon's military success uh, was at 1809. That was as successful as they ever got. That was the height of French power. 1810 is when they divorced, and there was no war between 1809 and 1812. 1812, of course, was the invasion of Russia, and what happened in Russia. The the whole thing turned into a disaster. The invasion was successful. They did reach Moscow, but they didn't achieve their political objectives, so they had to fall back, and that's where the French army fell into ruin, and they haven't recovered to this day, and they never will again. So historians do sort of make that comparison. The problem with that, it kind of fallacious. It's like a post hoc ergo propter hoc sort of argument. It's after this, therefore, because of this. Uh, Napoleon's didn't spiral into ruin just because he leaves Josephine. Well, it's almost like they were being superstitious here. It isn't a coincidence. That's all it is. There's other reasons for why this is going on.
Yeah, and Mr. Londo's review movie says, I was hoping for a biopic. Yeah. um,
It has to be a series. If you're going to do a biopic, you have to start with Corsica. You have to show him as a young boy, 9 years old, going to France, spending the next 8 years away from his family, and then going back and dealing with the whole thing about Paoli, and Paoli hates his deceased father, and the whole thing with his family, and him having to choose between the ideals of the revolution that he's learning from his education in France versus the nationalism of Corsica, and that's really the defining feature of an early life. You have to have that in any Napoleon story.
yeah,
It's a big part of his development. Sorry.
no, I agree with you 100%. And I was just reading some more of the comments, with the writers talks about the Egypt wide shot was great. It was. And of course, the divorce scene, which I think is very funny in a sense, because during the divorce scene, that might have been the most intimate and intensity that I've seen of the two actors and their, this relationship as these two characters. For me, in fact, that might have been the one time where I was convinced that they had this deep, intense love for one another than any other time in the film. So it's a good thing that you brought that up, the writers. Another thing that I was going to mention, Darth Vader, is sometimes there would be some scenes where, um, Joaquin Phoenix has this, he's not necessarily talking, but people are talking to him. And one or two scenes where he's sitting down, I think it might have been when they told him he either had to be banished to Alba or to St. Helens, or Helens
Yeah, that's
the
bullcrap.
second time.
Mhm.
Um, there was a look on his face, and the look on his face right there to me was like, I said, "Oh, that's Napoleon." Like that shot, it was just like one shot in the film where I thought to myself, "That's it. He got it there." And then, of course, it was gone because the shot was over.
Mm.
But I think it's very interesting how, even just, let's say, for those of us, I am not a Napoleon scholar, I am not a historian, and I don't know all the details. But even I have impressions of what I feel Napoleon would reflect, especially on screen in the moving image. And it is very interesting, that I felt, that we all had moments in this film that might have captured a glimpse of it. It's a lot of times they're almost getting to that point. They're almost at that point, but they're not quite reaching that level of.
It's like Lucy with the football.
Yes, yes, it is. It is like Lucy with the football.
And by the way, I love the brocaded collar scene right there. It looks really good.
It does, and this is, I wanted to bring this up, is that these certain scenes here where you get to see the emotion of Joaquin Phoenix. He's a brilliant actor and he can portray anything. So, there was never a question about whether he could do this, but of course, we talked about his age. We talked about a number of different things. Um, so, and this is another thing. And thank you, the writers, for bringing this up about, the way that Joaquin Phoenix was asked to depict him, right? The director is asking him to do this in a very reserved and not very talkative manner. However, I think Napoleon must have been somewhat more talkative. As you said, Darth Plato, he was known for going around supporting the troops, finding out what their concerns and things were on their mind. And I think he probably was like that in his personal life, because in order to gain favor like this, you have to be very good at the parlay. So, what do you think, Darth Plato? Was this version of Napoleon, this character, too quiet?
Yes, I mentioned that earlier. He was way too stiff, way too reserved. He should have been more vocal. Like I said, he should have been playing 20 questions. He was extremely smitten with Josephine. He was. That's for sure. He definitely did love Josephine. There's no question about this. So he wouldn't have been saying it like that. He would have just been like, I got questions. I got to ask this. I got to ask that. He wouldn't have. He would have been talking fast because he wanted to make sure he get all his questions in. That would have been more realistic. He's just sitting there like when is this going to end? I was kind of wondering what the heck is this.
Well, I think that, after looking at the accomplishments, as we said, the look of it, with the exception of Joaquin Phoenix's age, which you can't ignore. You can't ignore that Napoleon doesn't look young in this film, but I also don't think that they would have successfully been able to de-age him. So,
Yeah.
once they committed to him, they had to go forward with this. And you mentioned that he portrayed this character like Commodus. Um, yeah, I think that's very interesting. I almost felt as if he was also portraying him a little bit like he's a gangster in a sense, because there's some scenes where
Oh
he,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Jesus. Yeah. That's another thing you see in Napoleon Scholarship. It's a common theme where they just try to make him out to be like this Corsican thug. In those days in the past, you know how racial stereotypes work. Well, in those days, a common stereotype for Italians was that they were the knife concealing um, vagabonds, like blackguard that'll just stab you at a moment's notice. So not very trustworthy people. That was the opinion of Italian back in those days, and the Bonapartes were of Italian ancestry that lived in Corsica for years, and so that was a common thing that he had to deal with now at that time. Like, but also you see in scholarship this idea that a lot of what Napoleon did was some sort of vendetta, this Corsican vendetta, and that may have been what Scott and the author, whatever his name was, I have it here. Um, David Scarpa was the guy who wrote the movie. That's probably where he may have been coming from. I don't think it's accurate at all.
well, I have another question, and it is kind of depicted in the story. And, I'm guessing, and they chose to do this, but I don't know if it's true, but I think it would be very interesting if it is true that a lot of Napoleon's life is like on the papers, on the tabloids. It feels like, all of his personal business is on there. So he has no privacy. Everybody knows what's going on. There's chatter. And
Yeah. Okay. The reason why that happened is because when he was in Egypt and he was sending letters to France, he included a wife. He wrote every day. He wrote on an average 2 hours a day, just letters. Just write letter, then write another letter, then write another letter. He wrote a lot of letters, and most of his letters do survive to us. So we have a pretty good insight into what he thought because it's all in his letters. Now, when he was writing letters to his wife, this occurred during a time when he had just learned that he had been cuckolded by one Hippolyte Charles. He learned about this on the march from Alexandria to Cairo. It was about halfway through that he learned of it, and his letters were well, what do you expect? He wasn't happy. So when the letters went to the boat, all in one big package to go to France, they get intercepted by the British, and the British take it back to London, and well, look at this. So they take it to the local tabloid, say, "Hey, I got a juicy one for you," and they put it all over the newspapers.
well, thank you for explaining that, and certainly that is good to know. And Alex Van Gollum, hi Alex, says that he loves the movie, and he has some critiques about it, the choices, but overall, it was what he was expecting to see. And the raw of the cannons and the battle scenes are just awesome. We're so glad you liked it. We're doing the review of the theatrical release. Dark Plato and I are also going to review the Apple release when that comes out soon as well, which is going to be a longer version. So I'm curious as to how that is going to be. But my question for you, Dark Plato, has to do with Josephine and the Czar. There was a scene where the Czar comes to visit Josephine.
Yeah, yeah.
I absolutely,
Alexander the First. Yeah,
yes, did that happen?
yeah, he did. Yeah, that was in 1814. He did pay a visit to Mount Maison, which is about a little north of Paris.
Okay. So, when he went to visit her, what happened? Was this a friendly visit? Did they know each other? Did they sleep together? What do you?
I no, I don't think it was anything inappropriate. I don't think that this was something that the that Alexander struggled with. Um, I think he just wanted to pay respect. I think he wanted to meet this lady because he heard from a lot of sources that she was a remarkable lady, and I think
Okay.
that's what he wanted.
Now you
Uh,
struck on a nerve of the other thing I want to focus on.
okay.
So, um, yes, and the writer says yes, the Dolby did pay off, didn't it? It was wonderful. I kept going, oh my gosh, for a lot of the stuff. So here's the second thing in the film that I felt that the film uh, that you couldn't deny, but the film was maybe not able to accomplish, is that Josephine, in her own right, was charismatic. We hear the czar of Russia, telling her
Mhm.
that I know how incredible you are. You're such an incredible woman. And yet we didn't feel that. At least I didn't feel that in this film. And I don't know whether it's possible to depict that intensity, that impression.
Yeah, I don't know if he would have worded it like that, but I'm sure he would have wanted to pay a visit.
Well,
She was the Empress of France after all.
yes, but Darth Plato, what I'm really trying to allude to
Okay.
is, so we have and the depiction of Napoleon, who we know to be incredibly charismatic, and people are
But awkward.
right, but people are behind him, and we don't see that. And then we have the depiction of Josephine, who is also charismatic, an important figure in her own right, and we don't necessarily get that either. So I think it's
Um,
very interesting in a sense of the impression that the individuals had on those around them is not necessarily something that was important to me. I think for the director of the film, they didn't want to necessarily impress upon you um,
no, he did
how
not.
impactful these characters are, these individuals are historically, and I think that that was maybe the most important thing,
Yeah,
because everybody wants to know these relationships, and we talk about these things. The point of putting something in the moving image is we can go and read a book at any time, but we want to see these. If it's going to be a dramatization or if it's going to be a biopic, we want to see scenes that mean something and have a certain level of intensity. And I think that for me, that's what was missing in this film. And as I said to you guys, if you for those of you who are watching here in this stream, go ahead and watch the Armand Assante, Jacqueline Bisset version. It's very, very
yeah.
romantic.
It's a TV movie from the '80s. It's on YouTube. Last I checked, um, and that's about how long? It's about 4.5 hours, I think.
Yeah,
It's pretty long.
it is
And
long.
but what's good about it is it focuses on their interaction, and that's what makes it good. And it also shows a little bit about look in this movie that what we just saw. She comes out of nowhere. They're like at a party, and they're just kind of hey, hi, what's your name? That's it. That's all. That's how it starts. They don't show you anything about where Josephine had come from. What happened to Josephine during the Reign of Terror? She was in prison, waiting the guillotine.
Right, and that's why you kind of see her. She looks a little disheveled at least at first, and they cut her hair. They're gonna whatever it was. I think that they left out some important things about her. One day you're down, the next day you're up. It can only get better after knowing you're going to be killed at the guillotine, right? Oh, surprise, quelle surprise! They called it off. Robespierre is behind bars, but
Yeah,
what's
and another thing, they showed that she had two kids. Okay,
yes,
so she's a widow. Yeah, why do you suppose she's a widow? Because her late husband was guillotined.
yes. And those are some very important um, things that they could have said in the story. But even then, at the very end, let's say, so now she's being lauded as being somebody who has an incredible, charisma, such an important role figure. Then at the end, when Napoleon is being held on a British ship, I'm assuming it's a British ship, and
The
he's
Bellerophon, yeah.
he's sitting there eating his meal, and the midshipmen are fascinated by him, even in foreign countries. Darth Plato.
Yes, they would have been. That really happened.
This is what I think is very interesting, is that it feels like those scenes where they're trying to impress upon us how impressive this person is, but overall the tone of the film is not giving us that. So
No, it doesn't. No.
So I kind of I'm wondering where.
Look, there was a look. Napoleon was a larger than life figure. It's called the Napoleonic era for a reason. He owned that time period. He's the most written about figure of that century. His memoirs are the most written book, most read, has been read the most of that century. That was dated in that century. I mean, when he went to England, he didn't set foot on the shore. He was on the boat at Dover, and half of Lower England came down to see him at Dover. They were waiting for them to see him. He walked out onto the quarterdeck of the ship, it kind of going like this, and the whole place was going crazy. They were like they were at the Super Bowl.
So with this being said, what was it exactly, do you think, that grabbed people's attention and made people want to be and support Napoleon so much, and Josephine as well? What, in your opinion, Darth Plato? I mean, we didn't necessarily get a sense of it in the
From
film
whom?
for everybody.
Well,
Why so many?
my answer is going to be different if you're talking about the French or the British.
So let's conquer the French first, and then you can go international after that.
Okay. Well, for the French, very simply because he ended the uncertainty of the political violence of Paris. That's it in a nutshell. That was Napoleon's primary ambition for getting involved with the Brumaire coup and for taking control of the entire government. In his mind, he thought that the benevolent dictator was really the only way forward.
And they did express that very well in the film, didn't they, Darth Plato?
I thought they did okay with that. That scene was okay, except for the part about the coup itself, about how he was kind of running out of the room and how they did that thing. That scene was kind of bold, but beyond that, I thought it was okay.
And then how do you explain the fascination outside of France?
Simply put, Napoleon was a very scientific man. He was a very he was fond of the arts, and he was a strong proponent, very strong proponent of liberal thought. This idea of equality and that politics there should be like people peaceful transition of power. Even though he didn't actually practice, he wasn't consistent with that himself. He nevertheless preached it, and so people in England was in a bad place in those days because there was a lot of problem with inequality and people not having their rights. That was something that the English were really struggling with, even though England was one of the birthplaces for modern liberalism. It, there was a lot of inconsistency, and people were calling out about it. You had a group called the Radicals that said, you know, reform isn't enough. We have to get rid of these people, like French revolutionists did. They wanted to repeat the bloodshed of the French Revolution in England, and that went a little too far for the Liberal Party. And basically, but the average folk, look, what could the average folk? It was an interesting story. Here's this man that seems to be invincible. Look at the paper. He's won another battle. Then you then you go down the street another day, and there's the guy selling the paper, and oh, he's won another battle. He just won battle after battle after battle. He seems to be invincible. He seems to be reordering the shape of Europe. And look at it. He's talking about equality. Well, why can't we have someone like that here? That's what a lot of people are talking about. Look at there was one guy in the parliament who was so distraught by the outcome of Waterloo that he actually killed himself.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, Darth Plato. Mr. Londell's Groovy Movie says his liberal mind, Napoleon's liberal mind, is what the
Yeah,
British
that,
saw
that's that's right.
as the
Yeah,
greater threat.
yeah, that's a good comment, but it's actually more profound than that. It didn't end with him. It continued throughout the entire century. After the Congress of Vienna and going to the like the Holy Alliance and the Metternich system of Europe. Not, I don't mean to turn this into an academic thing. Just very briefly,
You can turn it into whatever you want. That's why you're here. So
the country like Prussia, Austria, and Russia were scared to death of liberalism and equality because they wanted to keep their privilege. They were afraid of what giving in, like, you know, you give an inch, they take a mile. That was they were afraid. They were afraid of what would happen to their power if they gave too much freedom to the people. And when there was revolution, so they talked about this amongst themselves. In the eventuality of revolution, they would intervene and assist one another. There would be no ifs or buts about it. And that happened in 1848 when Prussia, there was a revolution in Prussia. The Russian army came in and assisted them and helped put down the revolution. Why? Because they didn't want a situation like Napoleon happening again. That was how influential this guy was.
Yeah, and I think that you struck a nerve quite truly there by saying that uh, he obviously gave people hope in a way that they hadn't felt it before, and that's how I would describe it. They knew that as long as he was at the helm, that things were going to be different for them somehow, and I think people will go behind that. If you can get an idea that brings people to your side, it's a lot stronger than all the money in the world. An idea is something that can certainly swing people to bring them onto your side.
I have one more thing about the French. There was something else that he did that really resonated with people in terms of restoring order. Now, when he became power, when he came into power, a long-standing problem going back to the beginning of the revolution was the problem of the highwaymen. The entire countryside was infested with highwaymen. You couldn't travel between the towns and the cities unless you were part of a large armed group because the robber bands and groups were just so bad. So Napoleon, one of his first decisions that he made when he came to power was he had to put a stop to that. We have to restore internal order so that there can be a regular economy between the cities. There have to be unfettered access throughout the interior of France. So what he did was he mustered a force of 350,000 men. He gave them gendarme power, that is the power of police,
Hmm. Hmm.
and they could go around and they could with impunity they could anyone who was suspected of being a highwayman they hanged them on the spot. And it took about 5 years, but within 5 years the highwayman problem went away. He put the fear of God into them, and the whole thing went away. And that's what people really respected about someone like Napoleon, because he got things done.
And thanks for sharing that with us. And Mr. Londo's Review Movies mentions, I wonder how much of this did they blame on the American Revolution? Probably all of it. Um,
How much of what did they?
of this sentiment towards wanting to have freedom and equality. At least
I think it comes from Rousseau.
Londo.
It comes from Rousseau. But
Yeah.
I'm sure the American Revolution did give some encouragement. I know that the revolution that was in South Africa, that to break away from Britain, they used an American model there. So it definitely did have some inspiration. But in terms of the idea itself of what was going on in France, that came from Rousseau
Now
primarily.
I'm wondering if we're going to get another version of Napoleon, because as you guys know, sometimes we'll see one film and then someone else will go ahead and make another film about the
Yeah,
same.
I hear Steven Spielberg is doing something like that.
I'm sorry.
I hear Steven Spielberg is doing that.
Exactly. So, as you guys know, there's going to be more than one version of this coming out. I'm excited to see this. I'm so happy that they made this film. This was, of course, the director's vision, and I'm sure he's very happy with it. I recommend the film too, Darth Vader. I say anybody who wants to see this film, go ahead and see it. It's, I guess, a unique take on Napoleon, um, and Josephine, may be different from some of the points that you and I mentioned, but
So
I would recommend it to somebody if they wanted to see a little bit about Napoleon's life. What are your final thoughts on the film?
my final thoughts. I've only just got started.
What else
Um,
would you like to say about the
hmm?
film, Plato?
Okay. Okay. I'm going to go this through scene by scene. Napoleon did not witness the execution of Marie Antoinette. I don't know why they put that scene in there. It didn't need to be in there at all. The same with the scene with Robespierre being overthrown and then trying to shoot himself. Those scenes should not have been in the movie at all. And he did not witness either of those scenes. He did witness some key event of the revolution. I don't need to get into it here. Actually, I will mention one thing. He there was one incident that he witnessed that really affected him, and that was the scene where the sans culottes were outside, where the king and queen were living, and the Swiss Guard were there, and there was a face-off. They wanted to get into the apartment, and there was negotiation, and the Swiss Guard did stand down, and the Sans Culottes did go in there. And what they did was they massacred the entire Sans Culottes. They massacred the Swiss Guard. I mean, and Napoleon witnessed it. He wasn't there as a participant. He was in the crowd watching all this unfold, and that deeply affected him and the power of the mob. So 4 years later, so 4 years. Okay, so yeah, the movie says it was 4 years later, but it's not 4 years later because while that was going on, the thing about the execution of the Queen, there was a situation in Toulon where the British were in Toulon. Those events were simultaneous, so he couldn't have been witnessing the events of Marie Antoinette being guillotined and being in Toulon at the same time because they were simultaneous. What happened at Toulon was he attacked a fort called Fort Mulgrave, where the British had a high ground advantage, and so they assaulted that position called La Galette. And once they were up there, they were able to fire heated cannonballs at the British ships, so the British were obliged to withdraw. And at that point, the screen sort of fades out. You don't show anything more of that. That's really the beginning of the action, not the end of the action. After that, it jumps a year, and again, they show Robespierre. We don't need to know about Robespierre. And then that jumps another year to 1795. That's where you have what's called the whiff of grape shot incident. That's the scene where Napoleon was with his troops and lined up with cannon, and you have the citizenry of Paris. Now, this isn't just an ordinary protest. This was a counter-revolutionary movement that's being organized by the Royalists and the British. And by the way, that event was simultaneous to what we saw in episode 4 of the Hornblower series, where the British were landing in Quiberon. Those events were simultaneous. So remember what I said about the massacre of the Swiss Guards. Napoleon remembered that, and that was a motivation for why Napoleon chose to use cannon in this situation. He needed to put this thing to bed right away because what happens when a mob wins? What do you call a mob that wins? It's called a nation, and he wasn't going to allow that to happen. After that, okay, so it jumps another year to 1796, and that's when they marry. That's also when he became the head of the army of Italy, but they didn't show that in the movie at all. They just showed him getting married, and that's it, unfortunately. Then they jump 2 years to the Battle of the Pyramids, and they didn't shoot the pyramid or shoot the Sphinx. That's stupid. I don't know why they put that scene into the movie. That didn't happen. What's funny about that scene, they don't really, you don't really get this from the scene itself. All they showed was what the can going off, the guy falling off his sword. That's all they showed. That was a very interesting battle because the Mamluks had more men than the French. They had more horses. They had more guns. They had more cannon than the French, and they outnumbered the French by 60,000 men, and yet they didn't stand a chance. Um, and then and then they show the scene where he learned about he'd been cuckolded, that his wife had a lover, and basically the movie they're giving the impression that Napoleon left Egypt to go back to France to deal with his wife. That's not why he left France, but that's what the movie. That's not why he left to go to France. I mean, so that okay. So let's go with that. Okay, so that's what the movie's showing us. He's in Egypt. He learns about the affair, and next thing you know, he's going back to France. So in '99, so the next year, '99. So he's in France. He's doing Barras, the director, and they're accusing him of deserting his men. So what happened after that? You have the Brumaire coup. So the movie is implying that, oh, you're criticizing me, so I'm going to overthrow you. That's what the movie is implying. And that's not why it went down at all. I don't have time to really get into why that didn't happen. But I will say this. The scene where he's running out of the room and he's kind of falling down, that's all bull. That's not how it went down. He was in real danger, and his bodyguard had to come in around him. The grenadiers come in, and they did have to lead him out. So that did happen. It didn't happen like what they showed in the movie. And also this thing about the vote, where they go in there like, oh, let us vote. There was no vote. The whole reason why they were there was to tell them that their services were no longer required. The Constitution is null and void. A new Constitution will be drawn up, and you will be called back in some capacity at a later date. Please go home. That's what they were there to say. There was no vote. I don't know why that's in the movie. The next thing after they show Napoleon talking to the British ambassador Whitworth. So he goes in there and he shoots his mouth off, and That's not how it went down. There was an incident where he kind of lost his temper with the British ambassador publicly. That did happen, but they put it in the movie to sort of show that he's somehow on edge, that he's unhinged. What Whitworth does it says about this is that it was an improper exchange. I don't know why he did it, but there were other times where they met, and Whitworth wrote, "Oh, I had no reason for complaint," or "He behaved just fine." But they don't put that into the movie, of course. So again, they're painting more of a picture. Here's this guy's oh he's diplomatically unsound. He's talking like he's behaving like an idiot. After that, okay, now Talleyrand. They show Talleyrand meeting with the Austrian ambassador, proposing an alliance with France, and the Austrians say not interested. They show that in the movie. Now, right after that, they show the war. France is at war with Austria and Russia, and that's the battle in the snow with the whole thing about the ice. And then after that, he meets with Francis, and he said, "Oh, you should be grateful I didn't kill the whole army." It's basically what the movie's implying is oh, we are offering an alliance to you, and you said no. You say no to me, and they're basically implying that he went to war with Austria because they said no to him. That's not what happened at all. Now that's the impression it gives you. And after that, they jump forward 5 years. They skip a lot around. They skip a lot in this movie. So between that scene and the scene after, that's a period of 5 years. They jump 5 years to Napoleon Josephine divorcing the divorce scene. He did not slap Napoleon Josephine. That did not happen. I don't know why they put that into the movie. So basically, in that instant, they turn him into a wife beater. He does marry Marie Louise. That did happen. So he would have been 40 at the time, or 42. He would have been 40. He would have been about 41, 42 years old at the time. I believe she was 18. So that did happen. And then there's a scene where Napoleon meets the Tsar of Russia, and they have that uncomfortable exchange. I don't know why. I don't know why they were doing that. Why they did that scene at all. But again, like with the Austrian ambassador, what happens after that? After that, Napoleon's invading Russia. Why? Because he didn't have his way. So they're trying to make it look like Napoleon just having a temper tantrum, and then of course he goes to Moscow. Okay, so he goes to Moscow. He's like, "Where is everybody?" and all that. That's not what happened at all. Anyone that's read Tolstoy knows what happened. There were a lot of Russians who were there. They had Russians who were gathered outside where Napoleon was staying, saying, "So what do you intend to do? Are the people safe? What can we expect?" There were all kinds of people there. There was all kinds of violence going on. The French soldiers were rounding up people by the dozens and putting them in the fire squad for just being suspected of trying to upset the French presence there. And then they show Napoleon in bed, and he gets up and he goes out the window. Oh, the city's on fire. That's all nonsense. The fire started September 14th. The French army didn't even arrive in the city until the following day. The city was already on fire when they arrived. It's not something that caught them by surprise. I don't know why they filmed it like that. They were almost filming it like that to make him look incompetent. He's riding around his horse going, "Oh, where is everybody?" And then the city's on fire. Ha ha ha, oh, ha 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 ha. Look at this idiot. That's what they're trying to give the impression of. And then after that, they showed the abdication. So basically, they're implying that his defeat in Russia led to his abdication. In some ways, it did, but it wasn't immediately afterward. There was a lot of things that happened after that, like the Battle of Leipzig happened after that, which was the largest battle in the history of mankind to that point. Um,
Well, Darcy,
Josephine did ask to join. Oh yeah, that was one of the things that happened in Josephine's conversation with Alexander. Come to think of it, I think Josephine initiated that meeting. I think she asked to see him, and he obliged. And during that meeting, she asked Alexander, because he was a powerful man, I want to join Napoleon in exile. And apparently nothing came of it, but apparently she did ask that. So that really did happen. And then okay, so then he hears that Josephine's ill and he wants to go back to France. I guess that's the movie's way of saying, oh, he really loved Josephine. I guess is what I'm saying. What really happened was Josephine died late in the year of 1814, and so Napoleon was actually getting settled into Elba. He was actually kind of relaxed at that point. I think he was content with I've had my game and it's done. When he heard the news that Josephine had died, So I think something triggered in him that made him think, yeah, I gotta get out of here. I gotta do something. And then he went back to France. So he goes back to France. Napoleon and Josephine was already dead by this time. So that whole scene with going to Malmaison and meeting Auton, that whole thing was nonsense. So he goes to France, and the whole war thing with Waterloo was dumb. And there's oh yeah, and the scene with Wellington where the soldier said, "Oh, I have him in my sights here. Can I shoot him?" Like, oh no, no. And Wellington said, "No, I'm not going to do that." Now something like that did happen, but it was a cannoneer, not a guy with a gun. He, and then Napoleon wasn't so close to the British that you could aim a rifle or a gun at him. He wasn't that close. The reason why Wellington said no, don't try to target him, was because he didn't think it was appropriate for a general of an opposing army to try to target and assassinate the leader of another country, because it creates a bad precedent. He was a very disciplined guy, according to the old rules of doing. He was a very conservative guy, so he wouldn't have gone along with something like that because of appearances' sake. For appearances' sake, that's why he said he said to leave it alone. Wellington was not above that sort of thing individually. When he was in Spain, there was an incident where there was a British soldier, a French general in the distance, Marshal Masséna, and and Wellington went up to one of his cannoneers and said, "You see that guy down there? Yeah, take that guy out." And they did. They tried to fire a cannon at that guy to blow him up, and they missed. And so Wellington wasn't above that sort of thing. What I'm trying to say. Okay, and this is my last thought. It's about Saint Helena. The scene in Saint Helena, honestly, I think is the most realistic scene in the entire movie. This is the best scene in the movie. His scene of Saint Helena. This is I think they actually get somewhat right. So he's sitting there at the table with his book, and he's talking to this little girl, to this I wrote it down. Shoot, Betsy. What was her name? Yeah, Betsy Balcombe. That the little girl he was talking to was Betsy Balcombe. That was her name. Yeah, so there really was a little girl that he met on San Helena, and he said, well, "What are you doing?" "I'm writing a book, and where I'm always right and everybody else is always wrong." That's actually true. He wrote a memoir trying to justify his decision making during the Waterloo campaign because he couldn't stand the idea that he lost to that tool to Wellington, and he was trying to put himself in the best possible light. He was blaming others, and so that really did happen. So that scene is actually true. He really did. He did really write that book. And then what happens? Oh, he didn't fall over dead quite like that. It's depicted wrong, but he did die in St. Helena. But the way they showed it was so bad. It was a god. They ripped off the Godfather 3. Is what I'm trying to say. They ripped off the Godfather 3.
Well, I did mention that I thought that they were trying that this portrayal was almost gangster like, uh, and there are some things in it that I felt had similarities to it. But thank you for pointing out those historical inconsistencies, as Tom mentioned. Ridley Scott did, and you
Right.
also mentioned it.
Yeah,
Mentioned
but the scene
that
with the ice
was
where
not
he
that important to him. So
yeah.
this is certainly, we knew this going in, but we didn't know to what extreme it would be.
Right, but the scene with the ice more than anything else is the scene where Scott is trying to illustrate that this is a character assassination. This movie is a character assassination. That's what it's trying to do. And that scene more than anything else really illustrates that from beginning to end. Look, I see people complaining about this movie like, "Oh, this movie has no structure. It has no direction. It's just going from scene to scene to scene." And I don't understand the connection. They're showing this scene with Alexander, and then they have this big war scene, and I don't get it. Okay, well, I'm explaining it to you. The reason why it doesn't make sense is because you're looking at it like you would a movie like Gladiator or like Braveheart. You're trying to make sense along those kind of movies, but this isn't that kind of movie. This is an assassination hit piece movie. They're trying to make him look like a complete idiot. He's talking to the Russian guy. He doesn't get his way, and then he invades. That's what they're trying to. That is the message. That is the direction. That is the structure. And that's from beginning to end of this movie.
Well, that is
Yeah,
an
I'm gonna stop
interesting.
now before I turn into Robert.
No, that is an interesting analysis, and certainly I understand what you're saying about it. For me, as I mentioned earlier, my biggest concern about the film was the fact that if this is a character, let's say, analysis of this individual, you can't. It doesn't make sense to have scenes where he seems as if he's not that popular or able to be charismatic with individuals, especially his wife. And then we get to hear comments throughout the film where people are saying, we'll stand by you. Yes, for France. Yes, yeah, you're the greatest. And so it seems like a contradiction in some parts of the film. If they were going to go ahead and do it, they might have to figure out a way to work around that. So they couldn't deny the fact that this person was such an important character in history, and certainly had.
I'm glad that you recognize that as a layperson that's not an expert. The fact that you make that observation, I'm really impressed by that.
Dark Plato, you knew I wanted to see hot, steamy sex scenes between, Kirby and.
Instead, we got this.
So I'm going to be honest about it. I wanted to see a lot of passion. I wanted to see that, intensity on the screen. I wanted to see how far it would go. And I wanted to have my heart broken, and I didn't, because I didn't get that initial connection in their relationship. When they first met, I didn't get that connection. By the time the divorce scene came around, it was almost as if they were just like, okay, you get the house, I get the car. That's what it felt like. It didn't have what it should have had. However, the actor's performance during the divorce scene was extraordinary. But, I still need to believe that you're in love. I need to believe that. I also need to see
he was, she was not in real
yeah,
life.
but you know what I mean. I needed to see that. And I also think what's really interesting is I needed to see the love of the people for him as well. I needed to see all that. And despite the opinion and the view of the director, which, this is an art, and the director has created something that I know he is proud of, and I get that. And I applaud him for doing that and taking chances. That's fine. But for me personally, my moving image experience, those were some of the deficiencies for me. You mentioned some very important points in the film, and I think that this film does go well beyond artistic license. However, it took a lot of energy and effort to portray this. This was a big accomplishment. Mikey Lito says there's no depth of emotion in the film. I also
because he didn't care. He didn't care
about the consort. I think Darth Plato, you'd mentioned he kind of.
He's not going to kill Josephine. Don't be silly.
No, I mean Josephine's consort. Napoleon threatens Josephine's consort.
You mean? I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Charles.
Yes. So I certainly was going to get to that, Mike Alito, and it is something to think about because they both admit to having infidelity. So this was maybe somewhat more of an open relationship in a sense.
Well, if he had done that, then he'd be open to the criticism of, here we go, here the Corsican vendetta. Here we go.
Yes. And I think Mr. Orlando's Review Movies talks about I still feel the need to see this, he says, despite the not so nice analysis. I think that everybody's going to have different interpretations of this film. So, as you guys know, they're in love. So if it's going to be this love story that we hear, this intensity that Napoleon has, I felt it with Armand Assante. I mean, I felt it. So I was expecting to feel it with Joaquin Phoenix. I was expecting to see that passion that I'm expecting from Joaquin Phoenix. That's what I wanted.
I wanted to comment on this. This what's being said here. Not a nice analysis. I'm not trying to be nice. I'm not trying to be mean. I'm trying to be honest about what's going on here. I think this is a true analysis. I'm not nice or not. I'll take the hit. But I still feel the need to see the movie. Yeah,
I think it's
by all means, see the movie, judge it for yourself. I'm not saying don't see the movie.
Yeah, we certainly are not saying that. No one is saying that, guys. We encourage you to go see this film. As someone said, we need to go and see these films to support these historical films. And I think it's important for something like this to be made.
Where do you draw the line? Where does art end and irresponsibility begin? This movie to me it's an obvious hit piece. So it almost like it doesn't really rise to the level of art. Almost it almost like it makes art it vulgarizes art.
Well, sometimes people have different impressions of what a character should be like. So that's his version of art, and
Scott
that's
knows
his
darn well
version.
that that some of these events didn't happen. Like the thing about the eye, he knows that the front that's not how it went down. He knows
Well,
that it
that's a
didn't go
very
down.
different discussion. And but for the sake of this film trying to express what the director wanted, that's what I'm kind of that's my point of view of it. Certainly, historically, we knew it was wrong, so we went to see it anyway. That's something else that I think is very interesting is that we've accepted that it's not historically accurate. But what was done, and you kind of made you hit on this point, Darth Leto, about what kind of impression the director is trying to give us of this character. I feel that it's conflicted. You're feeling one thing, and I'm feeling a huge conflict in the overall impression of the character. So I think it is very interesting. We kind of have two different views about it, and that's why I like doing the show because we can talk about our different views about it. And there should have been more love scenes. So
Fair enough. Fair enough.
I always say there should be more love scenes. Um, and hello, Joey. Hope you're well. Also, want to mention Mike Alito says I never felt she was in love with him. She was happy to. Yeah, she that I would say that's an accurate description of it.
Yeah,
Um,
that no, that is true. She did not love him at any time. He wrote letters all the time. She rarely wrote back. He always addressed her in the tu form, and she always answered him in the vous form, which really matters in France. The vous is formal, the tu is personal. The tu is what you say to your loved one, your parents, your children, your siblings, your wife, your spouse. That's the tu form, and also and also she would address him as Bonaparte. She would never say my loving husband or Napoleon. She always just called him Bonaparte.
yes, and there are all types of relationships out there, everybody. Just keep that in mind. Um, Alex Von Gollum mentions, I do think we need to go see the film so they can produce more. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, guys. This is why we're doing this. We love that they did this. It's so important to see movies like this because we don't get them
Well,
all
of course, because it gives me a chance to go off.
the time. So, and I just want to thank everybody in the chat for being here tonight so we could talk about this film, which is amazing. It's an amazing film. Go and see the film, support the film. There's going to be more historical films coming out, and I'm so glad that we're getting them out at this particular time in history. Darth Plato, your final thoughts on the film?
I'm glad they made the movie because it allows me to talk about this time. It's an opportunity to discuss what really happened. So I'm not sad over it. I'm not gonna cry over it. I'm gonna be fair in my critique. I'm not gonna hold back. I think I'm being fair, but it's an opportunity to talk about what really happened. Like when Michaelitos mentions, I don't think that she really loved him. It allows me to step up and say, "Well, you're absolutely right," and here's my explanation, or something else about the matter. If this movie wasn't here for us, I wouldn't be able to talk about that. So I'm very grateful for that, and I'm very grateful for you for letting me come onto the show to talk about it.
Well, of course, I love doing reviews with you, Darth Plato, and thank you for your analysis of the film. I certainly do think it's so important for people to know the historical inaccuracies, and certainly it was a fair analysis of it. As I said, for me, I'm looking at is this really the director's intent, and did he actually accomplish that? And I don't think he accomplished what he was setting out to do. In fact, as I said,
I think he accomplished exactly what he set out to do. But I'm sorry.
I don't think he accomplished what he wanted to do because of the inconsistencies and the contradictions, in particular of the characters that he could not deny. He had to put in some kind of support for the characters, even though I get a sense that that wasn't what was supposed to be the main focus. So, however, I think the artistic license, he couldn't pull back everything entirely, or else it wouldn't be the same character. The character wouldn't be recognizable historically. So it is very interesting looking at this. And certainly, guys, thank you for being here tonight. I want to thank Tom Jr. Jackson, moderator, collaborator, and good friend. Tom, thank you for doing everything that you do. I'm just looking for your link here, guys. Make sure you subscribe to Tom Jr. Jackson's YouTube channel. Tom also has his own channel. So make sure you do go ahead and check it out. Guys, please also subscribe to Positive Fandom, my YouTube channel. And guys, also subscribe to the Burr Network. And if you're not already a member of the PGS, guys, remember that you can become a member of the PGS for as little as 99 cents a month and be there
Seconded.
for those member only calls. So, guys, thank you for being here and watching this review. Thank you, everybody, for everything out there. Certainly something to think about. Yes, Michaelitos Scott's reaction to the criticism he created the thing he wanted to create.
Yep.
Yes, he did. And there's going to be a lot of people talking about this film, but not necessarily because it's about Napoleon. So I think it's going to, probably create a lot of discussion. Let's see what else comes out in the
Mm.
future.
You
And
mean the extended edition?
yeah, we're gonna be reviewing the extended edition,
Yeah,
guys,
we're not done yet.
the 4 hour version. So there's going to be a part two. And of course, guys, do check us out again for that. For the part two version, the Apple TV version, which is an extended version, and Michaelito is really curious as well as to how that's going to be. So only God knows what it's going to be like. Guys, please do also join me here in about 30 minutes. I'm going to be reviewing For All Mankind with
Yes.
Julian Mushkin in a little while. Uh,
Yes. Kick ass show.
and thanks so much, Darth Plato, for being here as always. And guys, remember, no matter where you are in the galaxy, always remember to please be kind. Take care, everybody.